Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Data Archiving Orientation for grantees conducting research funded by the National Institute of Justice and the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. This orientation is hosted by the National Archive of Criminal Justice Data, or NACJD. My name is Becky Chu. I'm the NACJD Data Project Manager that oversees the NIJ and OJJDP data submissions. This is a self-guided orientation. A table of contents is provided in the description box so that you can skip to specific sections as needed. This orientation will begin with a brief introduction to NACJD. I will then go over how to prepare for your submission. Specifically, I will review the components of the data archiving plan, the materials you are required to submit, and the actual deposit and post-deposit processes. And finally, I'll discuss a couple of post-release activities, such as adding to the study's data-related publications list and how to submit for needed study updates. So just a little bit about NACJD. NACJD is a topical archive that houses and disseminates data related to crime and criminal justice topics. We are located within our parent organization, the Inter-University Consortium for Political and Social Research, or ICPSR, at the University of Michigan. The archive was established at ICPSR in 1978 and is one of ICPSR's oldest archives. Our mission is to support secondary research on topics related to crime and criminal justice by facilitating the discovery and use of data. We aim to provide quality data for reuse, to reproduce results, and to facilitate new research. Most of our data is funded by our sponsors, NIJ, OJJDP, and the Bureau of Justice Statistics, or BJS. Our current holdings include over 3,200 curated studies and statistical data series, and we're releasing new data every month. So our data are from official sources like BJS, and individual research teams, researchers like you who receive funding from NIJ and OJJDP. And as you well know, both NIJ and OJJDP require their individual grantees to archive their data at the end of their grant period. In this orientation, we will focus on requirements to archive at NACJD. A separate orientation is available on our website for grantees archiving at repositories other than NACJD. Now we're going to go over how to prepare for your submission to NACJD. Preparation essentially begins with the funding announcement and your data archiving plan. Data archiving plans are required in most, if not all, NIJ and OJJDP funding announcements that involve research, evaluation, and data collection. NIJ and OJJDP funding solicitations include a data archiving statement similar to what is presented on this slide, and it contains a lot of important information about your archiving requirements. The first component that is highlighted in blue states that all data collected under NIJ or OJJDP awards must be submitted to NACJD. Exceptions to this requirement are very rare and must be approved by your NIJ grant manager. It's very important that you keep this archiving requirement in mind before making any promises to original data producers or study participants or entering into a data use agreement or memorandum of understanding. Your application will need to include a data archiving plan stating that data, documentation, and other materials necessary for secondary research will be submitted to NACJD. Later in the orientation, we will go over the specific materials that you will need to submit. The data archiving plan is one of those materials, and this original version included with your application is most often the version that will need to be submitted. The data archiving plan should also include a description of the quantity and formats of the data and documentation files that you plan to submit. For example, something like survey data will be processed and analyzed in SPSS, or we will interview 50 correctional officers and transcripts will be submitted in PDF. The archiving plan does not need to be lengthy, just 1 to 2 pages, and should include an estimated amount of effort needed to meet the archiving requirements. Finally, we strongly encourage you to submit your materials at least 90 days before the end of the grant period. NACJD reviews every submission, and it's rare that we don't have follow-up questions about the data or documentation. The 90-day cushion ensures that you will have staff available to answer our questions and make any necessary edits or adjustments to your deposit. There's a lot of submission guidance available to you on topics ranging from privacy and human subjects protection considerations to what to do when there's a change in key personnel on your project. This slide provides 2 NIJ links to general guidance and more specific data archiving guidance. We also include links to data management and archiving guides provided by ICPSR and specific information on submissions to NACJD, which we'll turn to next. NACJD provides a PDF of guidelines for depositing NIJ and OJJDP data on our website. This is one document that contains guidance to individual researchers on submitting quantitative, qualitative, and geospatial data deposits, as well as secondary analysis projects. There is also an additional guidelines document for Office of Justice Programs analysts, program officers, and contractors submitting data to NACJD, but we recommend referring to the document designed for individual researchers if you're looking for specific guidance on preparing data deposits. This slide lists the materials you are required to submit to NACJD. We recommend that you pull together these materials as soon as they're ready. Most of the required materials on this list, such as the data archiving plan and IRB documentation, will be completed well before the end of the grant period. So the first item is data. As previously mentioned, any data collected under grant funding should be submitted to NACJD. Again, exceptions to this requirement are rare. The data archiving plan is almost always the original plan that was submitted with your funding application. We review this plan to confirm that the data you plan to collect were submitted to NACJD. Significant deviations from this plan, such as proposing to collect and archive data but then not collecting those data, should be noted at submission. Changes like this should have been discussed with your grant manager, and they may have requested that you submit an updated archiving plan for approval. If that was the case, the updated plan should be submitted to NACJD. If you're unsure if something is a significant change from the original plan, please email NACJD for clarification. We also need the IRB approved protocol or the determination letter, as well as the fully executed privacy certificate, meaning the certificate is completed and dated and has signatures of both the PI and an institutional representative. We also need a copy of the final report or journal article that will be submitted to NIJ or OJJDP. The report will not be released with your study, so draft versions are acceptable. The final published version of your report will be released by and accessible through the Office of Justice Programs National Criminal Justice Reference Service, or NCJRS. Once your study has been released and the final report is published and available to the public, NACJD will provide the link to the full report on your study's homepage. We'll come back to this later in the orientation. So we need a copy of the report for a couple of reasons. Part of our review includes making sure the data submitted will replicate the findings in your report. Also, some information from the report, like a study description, might be used to create the metadata for your study page. The NACJD submission checklist and inventory is a fillable PDF available on our website, and it should be completed with all files listed in the inventory pages. This is to ensure all files that you intended to submit were actually submitted and received by NACJD. If you have a large number of files, we recommend that you organize your files into folders in the deposit workspace, and then list the folder and number of files within each folder on the inventory. Finally, if applicable to your study, please include copies of informed consent forms or scripts and any data use agreements or memorandums of understanding. We reference these materials to ensure that sharing the data won't violate any previous agreements that you may have made with study participants or data producers. Additional documentation files may also be required depending upon the type and format of your data. All of the information on the next two slides is included in the PDF guide available on our website, but I'll highlight some major issues here. For quantitative data, we prefer SPSS format because our internal system tools process data files in SPSS. But the other widely used formats, such as SAS and Stata, are of course acceptable. We ask that variable labels and value labels are embedded in the data file and that all missing values are defined and declared as missing. Having this information included in the data file makes your data easier to use in future research. We can accept Excel, but Excel is not ideal as variable information cannot be embedded. If you submit your data in Excel, a codebook is required documenting all variable information. For the codebooks, we prefer they be in PDF, Word, or rich text format. They should not be basic data output or dictionary files. Codebooks should provide more detailed information on the study design, sampling methods, and data collection or fieldwork issues, as well as details about the variables, such as formatting issues, places where variables were reverse coded, and other known data anomalies or caveats that a secondary analyst would need to know when using your data. Syntax files containing data analysis programming code are also requested, but are not required unless you are submitting a secondary data analysis project. We'll address this more fully in an upcoming slide. Qualitative data should be submitted in Word, plain text, rich text format, or PDF with optical character recognition. We cannot accept data in qualitative data analysis software, such as NVivo or Atlas TI at this time. We ask that you please submit Microsoft Word extracts from these types of software instead. We also need a coding scheme or tree, an interview map, and roster. For geospatial data deposits, ESRI shapefile is preferred and must include the main file, the index file, and the DBase table. We also ask that you include the project file and attribute information. Again, all of this information and much more is included in the guidelines document that can be found through the link in the current slide. If your data are in a format not listed in the guidelines document, including non-standard data such as video data or image files, please contact NACJD before submitting your deposit. Some additional issues to consider as you're preparing for your deposit. If your quantitative data file contains many or long string variables, please review the section in the guidelines on submitting qualitative data and treat these string variables accordingly. We sometimes get questions about whether collected but unused data need to be submitted. The answer is yes. All data collected under grant funds should be submitted to NACJD. However, raw data that was not used in your analysis do not have to be labeled or formatted. We recommend that unused raw data be submitted in a data file separate from the data used in your analysis. If separating the data is not feasible, please be sure to include documentation listing which variables were not used. Both NACJD and NIJ often get questions from grantees about how to adequately de-identify data in order to protect the privacy of research subjects, while also ensuring that deposited data remain useful for secondary analysis. So it's a balance of minimizing disclosure risk and maximizing analytic utility. If after removing the direct and indirect identifiers from the data, you still feel there is a disclosure risk, or if you feel that removing potentially identifying information would impair the analytic utility of the data, you may want to consider requesting that your data be restricted use. Restricted use data can retain some identifying information because there are controls in place for accessing the data. The link provided in this slide will take you to a page describing restricted data, the restricted data application process, and the different ways that we disseminate restricted data. We would also strongly encourage you to contact NACJD to schedule a consultation. We are always interested to hear about the data being deposited, and we're happy to work with you to find a solution. Now we'll turn to an overview of projects analyzing existing data or secondary data analysis projects. If your project involves the analysis of existing data, please note that you do have archiving requirements. All of the documentation listed on the required material slide presented earlier should still be submitted to NACJD. In rare and justified circumstances, an exception may be made to the requirement for submission of data. You should confirm as early as possible whether or not you have permission from the original data producer to archive their data at NACJD. This includes the original data and any derived data, meaning newly created variables for your project. If you're entering into a memorandum of understanding or data use agreement with an original data producer, discuss archiving requirements at that time. So when might grantees not be required to archive their data at NACJD? It could be if the original data are already publicly available. Please note that it's not a guarantee that publicly accessible data do not need to be archived. You should still have a conversation about this with your grant manager. Another possible situation is where the original data producers will not permit their data to be archived due to justified legal, ethical, and/or technical issues. Again, you should confirm this as early on in the research process as possible and notify your NIJ grant manager if data sharing will be an issue. In these situations, grantees are still required to submit all the other materials listed on the earlier slide, such as the data archiving plan, IRB documentation, and privacy certificate. In addition, we ask that any variables derived from the original data are submitted, assuming that is permissible. We also need documentation for how these new variables were created and syntax files used to conduct data analysis. Most importantly, we need a data roadmap, which is a detailed description of the steps you took to acquire the data. This includes contact information and links to web pages for the original data source and materials you used in your project. Future researchers should be able to follow your roadmap and retrace the steps to acquire the same data and materials needed to replicate or expand on your work. Now we'll turn to a general overview of the deposit system. A full demo of the deposit system features is available on the NACJD website. You can get to the links to start your NIJ or OJJDP deposit in two ways. First, you can get there from the main Share Data page shown on this slide. Click the circle for NIJ data deposits or OJJDP data deposits. They are both linked to the submissions page. Alternatively, go directly to the submissions page. For this orientation, you don't need to read through the text on this slide. Rather, what we're highlighting here are the two orange boxes displayed at the bottom right. One is for NIJ awardees and the other is for OJJDP awardees. Select the box with the appropriate funder to start your deposit. To access the deposit system, you must first have a MyData account. You'll be asked to log into your existing MyData account, or you can create an account if you are a new user. Once you are logged in, a pop-up window will open with the archive auto-filled with the funder you selected, depending on which orange button you clicked. The archive should be either NACJD NIJ or NACJD OJJDP to ensure the deposit is routed to the appropriate data project manager for processing. This slide is an example of a deposit homepage. You will be asked to enter metadata for your project in various fields. Click the plus signs to expand the subject headings and display the fields where you can describe your data collection. This slide shows the expanded view under the subject heading Project Description. Some fields require a response, such as Principal Investigator Name and a project summary. This will be indicated with Required noted in red. Clicking Add Value or Edit will open a pop-up window where you enter the metadata. We encourage you to complete as many fields as possible. The information you provide will be used to describe your study and will help researchers search for and locate your data. It will be displayed on your study page upon release, so please also make sure the information is accurate. Each field also includes a question mark that will open a pop-up window with additional descriptive information about the field. All of the information entered here is automatically saved, so you can complete the fields, close the pop-up windows, and continue on with uploading your files. This also means that you can start your deposit at any time and upload files as they are ready for submission. Your deposit will remain open until you submit it to NACJD. One thing I want to highlight is the field for Grant Manager that is visible in this slide. This is referring to the NIJ Grant Manager, not the person at your home institution. This field is not currently required, but we recommend that you enter their contact information so that your grant manager will be notified when you submit your deposit. We also recommend that you share the deposit with another staff person. This ensures that someone affiliated with your project always has access to your deposit workspace and has permissions to make changes as needed. There is a Share Project button located on your deposit homepage to do this. When you have finished entering your metadata, uploading all the required files and documentation, and are ready to submit your deposit to NACJD, you need to navigate back to your deposit homepage by clicking your deposit number located in the top left corner. Your deposit number starts with either NACJD NIJ or NACJD OJJDP and is followed by a 6-digit number. Once on your homepage, click the blue Submit to ICPSR button on the right side of the page. If your submission is successful, you will receive an email confirmation from ICPSR Acquisitions almost immediately. NACJD is also notified when deposits are submitted. If you don't receive the email confirmation, either the deposit was not submitted or the MyData login email address was entered incorrectly. Contact NACJD if you're unsure of the email address you used and need assistance. Now we'll go over what happens post-deposit after you have submitted your materials to NACJD and have received this email confirmation. Every NIJ and OJJDP submission goes through a minimum of 2 deposit reviews by NACJD staff. The initial review is a verification that all materials required by NIJ and OJJDP were submitted to NACJD. If materials are missing from the submission or are incomplete, for example, a privacy certificate that is not fully executed, NACJD will send an email to the depositor requesting the additional materials. Once all required materials have been received and are complete, NACJD will send an email to the depositor and the grant manager confirming this. Please note that your archiving requirements are not fulfilled until all materials have been received by NACJD. Only then will your grant manager be notified. The completion time for the initial review is about 5 to 10 business days from the date of submission. The second review is a more in-depth review of your data and documentation to ensure that they are consistent and accurate. We do some checks to confirm that the results presented in the final report can be replicated with the submitted data files. If there are no issues with the data or the findings in the final report, NACJD will send an email to the depositor notifying them that their study is being moved to the curation queue. The deposit review at this stage is often an iterative process. It's extremely rare that there are no issues found the first time a data deposit review is completed. When we discover issues with the data or documentation, we send the depositor a questions document listing the issues we found. We request that responses be added to the document, and we may also request that data or documentation be updated and resubmitted to NACJD. The completion time for the data review is currently 15 to 20 business days, but it's dependent on the number of other deposits waiting to be reviewed. In general, we reviewed deposits in the order in which they were submitted. For many data deposit reviews, we request that data and documentation files be amended based on the issues discovered during our review, and then resubmitted or resupplied to NACJD. If a resupply is requested, we will reopen your deposit workspace so that you can upload updated or additional files. Sometimes the issues we find just require an explanation or clarification, and resupplies are not necessary. In this case, we will just ask that you add your responses to the questions document and email it back to NACJD. When the resupply is received, it goes back into the queue for another data deposit review, and the process is repeated until no other issues remain. Resupplies can be time-consuming, particularly if multiple resupplies are required. This is why we strongly recommend that you submit your deposit 90 days before the end of your award to ensure you will have staff available to answer any questions. Although requests for resupplies are common, they are also easily avoidable with good data management. This slide lists the most common issues we encounter during the data deposit review that require resupplies. The first three issues listed affect data quality: unlabeled variables, undeclared missing values, and undocumented or out-of-range values. These are the most common issues we find with deposits. If you've ever used data that were not adequately labeled, then you understand the importance of providing this information. Variable names and value labels are often not intuitive. Unlabeled data can significantly reduce data usability and make for a frustrating data use experience. In the submission checklist and inventory file, we ask that you confirm that these issues have been addressed before submitting your data to NACJD. Other issues we come across are qualitative transcripts that have not been fully de-identified, often still containing names of people, or transcripts that contain processing comments inserted by coders. Also, descriptive statistics generated during our data deposit review oftentimes don't match what is reported in a user guide, a code book, or the project's final report. More often than not, it turns out the data files are correct, but the documentation just needs to be updated. And finally, documentation for specific variables or even entire data files are sometimes missing from the deposit altogether. Please refer to the data management and data archiving guides linked in an earlier slide. We strongly encourage you to review these resources early in your data collection process to avoid the need for resupplies. As the data producers, you are the experts of your data, and you're in the position to ensure the data are in the best shape possible. Practicing good data management from the start will benefit you in the short and long term. Not only will it be much easier for your team to use your own data, but you will have much less work to do in the end when you're preparing to archive. If a resupply is requested, we will reopen your deposit workspace for you to upload updated or additional files. When you are finished, you need to navigate back to your deposit homepage and click the blue Resubmit to ICPSR button. If your submission is successful, you will receive another confirmation email. And again, NACJD will be notified of your submission. Only submit your resupplies through the secure online deposit system. Please do not send data files by email under any circumstances. The email will be securely deleted, and we will request that you resend the files through the online system. Once all issues have been resolved, your study is moved to the curation queue. NACJD will send another email notification at this stage. In general, quantitative data-only studies take around 6 to 8 months to review, curate, and release. It could be more or less time depending upon the quantity and quality of the data to be curated, as well as the size of the curation queue at that time. Data are released in multiple formats, including SPSS, SAS, Stata, R, and ASCII. Our curation team also creates a codebook listing the variables in order within the data file, along with frequency distributions. And if provided to us and sharing is permitted, data collection instruments are also released. Deposits that contain qualitative or geospatial data require more manual curation, so these studies will take longer to process and release. When the study is being released, an email is sent to the depositor from the acquisition staff. The email will contain the link to the study page, the DOI, the publication citation, and a link to generate a report summarizing the use of any publicly available study data or documentation. This is a useful tool if you want to get an idea of how much interest there has been in your study. Now we'll turn to a brief overview of some post-release activities. Presumably, you will continue to conduct research with your data even after your study has been released by NACJD. We ask researchers to send us citations or information for work using data released by NACJD or other topical archives at ICPSR. We have a dedicated bibliography team that is continually building a searchable database of published and unpublished works that use the data we disseminate. This slide has the link to the form you would use to submit your work to the bibliography team. The link is also provided in the email notification shown on a previous slide. You could also email your information to the bibliography team or to NACJD directly. We ask that you include the 5-digit study number and title for the NACJD studies used, along with any publication citations and web links to access the publication PDF or other research materials if available. So why is this important? The information compiled by the bibliography team helps other researchers discover your data and also learn how the study data have been used in prior research. This can be a useful tool when writing literature reviews and can also help identify possible gaps in the literature where additional research is needed. Each study page will display the number of data-related publications, circled in blue on the right. Although the text indicates published works, the ICPSR bibliography does include unpublished works, such as conference posters and working papers. We also include various audio-visual materials, such as videos, PowerPoint and Google Slides, and even podcasts. There is also a data-related publications tab, circled in blue in the middle of the image. When you select this tab, any data-related works compiled by bibliography will be displayed under the orange box. Here are 3 data-related publications and other works that use data from the studies shown on the previous slide. The first 2 listings include links to full-text PDFs. The third includes a link to an abstract for a conference presentation. As mentioned earlier in the orientation, the study's final published report is also added to the ICPSR bibliography. In the second listing on this slide, we provide the link to the public version of this study's final report that was released by NCJRS. We encourage researchers to submit information on data-related works at any time, even if it's years after your study has been released. In the event that you need to update data files or documentation for a study that has already been released, please contact NACJD before submitting any files. Study updates are not common, but they do happen on occasion and involve replacing previously released data or documentation with updated versions. As researchers continue to work with their data, they may find errors and determine that corrected files should replace the previously released versions. When you submit corrected versions, we will ask that you also include a description of the changes made so that our curation team understands the differences between the versions. Your study page includes a versions section, such as the one shown in this slide, where we list the changes made to your study and the dates the changes were made. This is the end of the orientation. If you have any follow-up questions, or if your question was not addressed in this orientation, please reach out to me directly or to NACJD user support. Thank you, and good luck with your research.